All right, fine. So thank you very much. And thanks to IK and the team, and thanks to PPL for supporting this important event. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be sharing some thoughts with you this morning on Nigeria, Africa's gateway to the global music industry. I must say that, yes, it's an African music movement, but I am speaking sort of from the Nigerian context, and I want to give you some insight and some background. It's just to give a bit of a background on myself. I'm not going to sort of read all this stuff out because there are a lot of slides, but just to give you a background, I've sort of done a lot of things over the last 35 years in the music and entertainment industry. My label Storm, our first release was with an artist called Nudine in 1991 actually, 32 years ago. We signed an artist called Junior and Pretty, who I believe are the real first Afrobeats artists. At the time, Storm really all through the 90s when we were functional and into the 2000s was a hip hop label. I'm a hip hop baby, I'm from that generation. But as we get into it, I think I'll explain the journey of the beats, as I called it, which is also the name of a docu-series that I executive produced with Showmax in 2022, which you can find on Showmax and Africa Magic and other places, which is a deep dive into the story, the history, the origins, and the journey of Nigerian music. This is just in terms of the numbers, the demographics, just to understand where we are. 221 million Nigerians. It will be 450 million by 2050, will be 750 million by 2300. So 1 in 4 young people on the planet will be African by 2050. So I believe the message I'm sending is that we are just beginning to enter the African century. What is happening now is not a fad. It's a journey of 250 years that is just coming full circle. If you go on to the next slide, please, which is called Origins. So in order to understand where things stand today, we have to understand where we're coming from. The first thing to get out of the way is that Africa is not a country. It's a country with 54 nations. The average age is probably 19 or 17, depending who you talk to. The population today is over 1 billion, 51% female, over 500 million smartphones, and over 1 billion phones in the hands of Africans. So Africa is what's next in terms of cool culture, music, movies, fashion, food, dance, arts, literature, tech, innovation, and more. The question is, how did this happen? What is Nigerian and African soft power? For me, it all begins with the music, but I must tell you that it also is just a return to the origins, because everything that I mentioned there started in Africa, and all that's happening now is Africa is coming main stage because we have the agency to own our narratives and to bring them to the world, utilizing new media, social media, and disrupting all these platforms which locked out the Africans for hundreds of years. So we come to the beat. For us, music is our DNA. In sub-Saharan Africa, we use music for ritual, for birth, for burial, for marriage, for feasts, and for celebration. We also have traditional dirge music for funerals, and I know we invented praise music where we hail the ancestors and family members and leaders. There are some things that are fundamental to African music, which lie at the heart of all Black music. The first one is the beat or the drum. I am Igbo. In Ogene music, the rhythm is played by the traditional orchestra, which does not include a drum, but the percussion will not allow you to notice that. As well as the beat being fundamental, because it operates like a metronome, is directly tied to our heartbeats. And like I said, it's in the DNA. It's not random. It is actually critical and crucial to everything that we do and how we exist and have existed. So call and response lies at the heart of all African music. And you see it at the heart of all Black American, Caribbean, Latin American music as well, because that is the journey of the beats. This slide is just talking about that and how this has evolved over time. So if you see the New Orleans musicians on the streets during the carnival, it's the same thing as the Ogene musicians in Igbo land. You see the talking drums of the Yoruba who are sending messages and coded messages. It is the same thing that you're seeing in Cuba and Haiti, because our music became code and it also became resistance. So in pre-colonial Africa, before the European, I wouldn't say invasion, the European reformation of the African narrative, Africa was made up of close to 10,000 nation states. These nation states were advanced societies with their own laws, customs, traditions, innovation, art, culture, and knowledge. They traded with neighbors like everybody else. They also fought wars of conquest and for defense like every other part of the world. But they also controlled technology. They controlled mathematics, astrology, medicine, and herbs. And these are the things that is always left out when the narrative of Africa is told, because we have not had the power and the leverage and the platforms to own our narratives, and have had narrative imposed on us from outsiders, either from Europe, from Arabia, or from Asia. Whereas everybody that I just mentioned is actually a child of Africa, because as you all know, we came first, and man evolved from the continent to the rest of the planet. So if we keep going, the transatlantic slave trade and dislocation. This is important because when you think about the transatlantic slave trade, we do not consider the agency of the Africans. I don't like to call them slaves. I like to call them enslaved people, because they're kidnapped and murdered. They were not willingly going into this process. But if you think about the numbers, they're staggering. Perhaps the entire population of the continent was 100 million in 1400 and 1450 when this all began, and over 25 million, just 25% of the continent was taken away. And you can also imagine all the people that died. You can imagine the despoliation from young people and young women and young men leaving, the most viral people in the community not being around. And then part of the actual objective of chattel slavery was to dehumanize, diminish, and delegitimize the people. And in doing this, the slavers were intentional in separating people and making sure they didn't understand each other's languages. So music becomes code. Right? Our music is code, and it becomes code for the last 500 years, and we use it to protect ourselves, to communicate better, and to keep the enemy disengaged from what we are doing. It's the same thing with the buffoonery and the clowning that you see. It is more intelligent to pretend to be stupid and stay alive than to show your intelligence and get killed because you are being persecuted for having intelligence. So self-protection and self-preservation and resistance is part of how our music works. Now, as the Portuguese led the way into the continent at Elmina in Ghana in search of El Dorado, the land of gold, the two-way Atlantic relationship began over 500 years ago. The Europeans came looking for gold and goods. Portugal was a poor neighbor to Aragon, today's Spain, and could not compete with France or England, so they went looking for an advantage. European historians point to Asia, but the excellent Born from Blackness, I can't remember his name, lays out the truth of how Europe, in brackets, found Africa. You know, I'm African. I reject the notion that you can find my hometown in which I have always lived. But that is the power of narrative. So then somebody else frames who you are, what you are, and where you are coming from without consideration of the actual facts. This is a problem that we are still uncovering and fighting and trying to kill. And that is the reality of this modern world in which we live on, built on the back of African slaves and the continent. Now, what did the Africans bring to the New World? Of course, they brought labor, physical power, but they also brought knowledge. They brought technology. They brought herbs and medicine. They had mastered the precious metals. They had mastered brass, iron, bronze, and steel long before the rest of the world. They had writing scripts. And of course, the food, the medicinal herbs, the fruits, and their own gods and mythology, and also the knowledge of crops and of land. All of these things come with the Africans to the West. And in the West, and you see those traces everywhere. And everywhere the African arrived in the West, the music changed. Because we came with the percussion, we came with the rhythm, we came with our dirge music, we came with our praise music, and it mixes with the indigenous people of these lands and changes music forever. So that is the impact of the Africans and the African diaspora in all these places, the 10 million Africans in Colombia, in Venezuela. Brazil has something like 150 million Black people, the biggest population of Black people outside the continent. 1 in 2 of those people are Nigerian in descent. And we have to do a better job of building the bridges and linking. And that's probably where we're coming to now and where that is all going to go forward. So the resistance of the Africans to slavery was intentional. It was clear. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have the technology to fight, but they had the heart and the spirit. And they used the music. And you will see slave revolts from Haiti to Cuba, from Brazil to Jamaica to Trinidad, Barbados, and of course in the Americas. And then of course that evolves into the civil rights movements and into how these nations become formed. And some of these nations, and most of these nations, Africans and Black people are still fighting for their rights, are still fighting for recognition, are still fighting to be seen as what they are with full agency. Now music is resistance. As our music spread through the slave trade, it took on new forms everywhere and affected the indigenous music in all the places we arrived. In the Caribbean, you see soca, calypso. Later, we see reggae, dancehall, and lovers rock, all of which have huge African influences in their call and response, rhythm, chanting, tone, and attitude. In America, we see the dirge music of Africans transformed to the blues, and the praise singing transformed to gospel. A lot of Africans were literate and better educated than their slave masters and could navigate with the stars. They were Muslim, Christian, or animist as Africans, but in their memoirs, you see the consistent struggle of the African to play dumb, to understate, to pander to the caricature, and that way to stay alive, because the most important thing was to stay alive. It is clear that showing intelligence was dangerous, so Africans spend a lot of these days developing their own code to retain their sense of humanity and to enable their own agency. And that is seen in their music, it is seen in their comedy, it is seen in their dance, but you had to have been African to understand what they were really doing and to connect the dots. As they settle in America, their music also began to transform and give birth to original genres, which can be said to be the basis of all popular music today. These genres include jazz, the blues, ragtime, gospel. These early genres then give birth to rock and roll, soul, funk, R&B, disco, New Jack Swing, rap, hip hop, house music. All of this is Black music, and by definition, it's African music to me. I claim it all. It's translocated, but we recognize it. And we don't even need to understand the language. So as to quote Bob Marley, one good thing about music, when it hits, you feel no pain. Thanks for that one, Bob. Now, the Caribbean and Africa, you know, the two-way journey across the Atlantic for 250 years is not something that I think Europeans really understand, and a lot of African Americans are not really that confident with. But if you live in Lagos, or if you're from Lagos, we know for the last 250 years, freed Africans from the Caribbean, from Haiti, from Cuba, from Brazil, have been coming back to Nigeria. We see it in the Brazilian architecture in the 1850s in Lagos and in Abeokuta. They've been coming back, they've been connecting, they've been moving back and forth. And as they did that, they began to change the narrative. And as they landed here, they brought with them the music that had also affected where they had gone. And that music then changes the indigenous music on the continent. And you begin to see this conversation of the last 150, 200 years. And of course, the Caribbean, perhaps with the sugar plantations in the Caribbean and in Latin America, they actually provided the enormous wealth that built the UK, built America, built these nations and these places with unpaid labor, unpaid IP, and unpaid knowledge. These are things that I cannot resolve in an African music presentation, but it's important to contextualize and understand where we are coming from, because narrative is what has framed the world for the last 500 years. The Africans are coming into their own. We are not coming to be defensive or apologize for being African, and we certainly know who we are and what we've brought to the world. And I think it's important that we operate on that basis of balance. But that two-way crossing and that two-way channelization is really important. In Latin America, we see the same thing in Colombia, in Cuba, in Haiti, in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Mexico. One can hear the African rhythms and dances that fused as Africans mixed with the indigenous. This led to us hearing rumba, merengue, soca, salsa, and so much more, and seeing the African expressions of percussion fused to create a whole new world of sounds. If you listen to Afrobeat of Fela, trust me, the Cuban early music from the early part of the 20th century are very similar. And you will hear that music also because the Efik people of the south of Nigeria, a lot of them arrived in Cuba and their rhythms affected that Cuban music. And when it comes back to Nigeria in the 40s and 50s, they also in Calabar were doing what later became called Afrobeats. And then other people like Chris Agilo in Lagos were doing Afrobeats until Fela created the canon. And that canon that he created is a fusion of the horn section of James Brown and Sly Stone, the funk that was happening at the time, of the Black Power lyrics of James Brown as well. Fela went back into himself and found his own self-awareness as an African and brought his own power to the mix with the juju of the Yoruba, the conga drums, and the Yoruba chants. And this is Afrobeats. Now, all these fusions are constantly happening. So what you will see and what you can recognize as a theme is that as Africans, we constantly fuse. This is the DNA of the African, this is the DNA of the Nigerian. We take it and put it in the soup, we affect it, we remix it, and it becomes something else. Yeah? Now, the last 100 years, I'm just running through this real quick. If you don't know, how our music began to change is from the end of the 19th century, the returning Africans, as I mentioned already, had begun to earn their freedoms and return to the continent. As they came, they brought music. In the early 20th century, A lot of Jamaicans brought their music to Ghana. This music was kind of soca, calypso, and it evolved and became high life in Ghana. And Ghana, of course, runs twin and twin with Nigeria, and that same music begins to enter Nigeria from the early 20s and 30s. So high life was also a phrase around the fact that, you know, it was colonialism and almost apartheid in most of these countries. So the high life was being led by the colonial officers in their black tie events and black functions, and the Africans were outside the door watching the high life, if you can understand. But then what happens is the Africans take it over, create their own rhythms, and bring it to the fore. And then they take it. That's what we do. We remixed it, and it became high life. That was our high life, not their high life, if that makes sense to you. So from there, you begin to see this confluence through the 1860s all the way through to the 1930s as Nigerian pop music begins to emerge. And as Nigerian pop music begins to emerge from the 40s to the 90s, you begin to see the emergence of the first superstars of Nigerian music. Bobby Benson is probably the first superstar of Nigerian music from about 1956 to 1960. I.K. Dairo, who had been big in Ghana, also became very big in Nigeria. Rex Lawson was the real first king of high life as well, almost like the African what's my man's name? Marvin Gaye, an incredible voice. Usta Celestine Uku. The high life from the southeast of Nigeria being markedly different from the high life from the southwest of Nigeria, and the juju music that was also evolving at the time in Nigeria. Then Nigeria enters a difficult civil war. America is also at war with itself at the same time, with the civil rights movement, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, the LA Watts riot, and Vietnam. And Fela is sitting in Los Angeles drinking it all in, and his guide, Sandra Isidore, who teaches him about the Black American journey and struggle for civil rights. And beyond opening him up, it also made him more self-aware. And he focused his original African essence and found his roadmap to Afrobeat through those engagements and communications. So Afrobeat, Fela's Afrobeat is also fusion music. It has African elements, it has funk, it has the horn section from James Brown. It has all those things. It has the girls dancing from the band Douche in Paris. Fela was a poet, prince, philosopher, and academic, but he came from the middle class but took himself back to the streets. So this is how the music is moving across and back and forth. And through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you will see in the 70s it's disco, in the 80s it's R&B and reggae, and these are the Black American and the Black global music forms that become dominant in Nigeria and affect our own indigenous music, where we also had juju music being very big, high life music being very big, and our own folk music being very big. But of course, you're coming to a more contemporary era. And by the time you get to the late 80s into the early 90s, hip hop is coming to the fore. And I have to tell you, hip hop is the first cousin of Afrobeats. And when I tell you this, it's because of the experiences we had. Like I said, I'm a hip hop baby. 1980, 82, 83, Africa Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash, we're listening to that stuff. But I'm Nigerian, and we're also taking connection of what is happening. Part of what happened in Nigeria is about 1993, all the major labels left Nigeria. Labels like Polydor and Polygram, their top 5 markets in the world were Nigeria. Richard Branson famously rescued the whole Virgin Empire from selling Yellow Man records in Nigeria, right, in the late 70s. So you have these labels making money, but they didn't make any investments in Nigeria. It was a rentier approach, similar to the oil and gas industry. Minimum investment, maximum extraction. And this is something we have to be careful about as Africans, because it's still the same model. Minimum investment, maximum extraction. So as Africans, we have to be careful to protect our IP, hold fast to our values, and be able to be in the value chain long enough to see the returns. Otherwise, we will find that we are just side players in the real game. Today in Africa, YouTube is the biggest platform and everybody's on YouTube. Nobody in Africa has a shareholding in YouTube. These are things we need to think about, things we need to talk about. The Nigerian disruption comes through individuals, pioneers, startup people. I tell people all the time, Nollywood is the first startup industry in Nigeria. The music is the second one, and nobody gave us anything. Nobody supported us. Nobody did anything. Till today, the music industry in Nigeria will probably tell you they've never really received support from anywhere. I mean, it's not a complaint, it's just a fact. But what happened was the street markets around Nigeria, who also were controlling the street business around the continent, were the people that sent our product out into the continent. And that's how Nollywood went out and took the continent. And that's how the music began to go out. As that began to happen, we begin to get emerging voices. These emerging voices come through major distributors at the street level in Nigeria. And then we begin to see the power of independent broadcasters. Because what happens is in 1992, Nigeria begins to legislate and opens up broadcasting. So you get private radio stations, private television stations on platforms that can support indigenous content. We as Nigerians cannot talk about our growth without partnerships on the continent and collaboration. Channel O, which went live in 1996 out of South Africa, showed us that we could do this, and really were the first platform to push our content outside Nigeria in an organized fashion. Then MTV Base came live in 2004, upped the game, upped the level, and gave us that feeling of being on the same level. So if I see a NATO C video right after a Jay-Z video, then I see a Mo Hits video with the Banj and Don Jazzy, and then I see P Square, and we've been making sure everybody's getting visibility and being seen. And Two-Face was the first face on MTV Base. And I remember MTV Base hardly even wanted to do their launch event in Nigeria because of perception around security. And I remember telling them in 2004, but we are the market. But in 2004, nobody understood that we were the market. They were thinking that I was just talking, but here we are 20 years later, and it seems obvious to everybody. But at the time, Nigerians themselves were not clear that we had that talent. We were not investing in it, and we weren't pushing through it. So there's a slide. How did Afrobeats take flight? It's from the street markets, Alaba. These are markets in Lagos. Upper Iweka is a very big distribution market zone in Onitsha, my hometown. From there, it goes into West Africa. And the South African media and platforms like DSTV, MultiChoice, Channel O were critical. The African street markets and radio, Kenneth Ray Power FM, Kwame from Nigeria, and Ogun State, OGBC, which is a radio station just outside Lagos, Channel O and MTV Base, and then Trace. Then you begin to get Hip TV and Sound City, which are Nigerian-owned platforms. And then, Nigerians are in over 200 countries. So we worked exclusively with Niger DJs, promoters in London, New York, Chicago, Paris, Joburg, Dubai, Indonesia, wherever we could find anybody. And it was almost like having an African chitlins coming in, whether you were doing shows for 100 people or 200 people, you just kept going. The small venue of the O2, people like Coco in London, Ropo, who've been promoting shows in the UK for 15 years, pushing it, DJ Abbas, that network of these individuals promoting African culture, African music, African fashion, Nollywood, has been a small group of self-funded, self-driven promoters who often don't get paid or even a thank you, but without them, you could not have arrived where you are today. And then this happens into America, Canada, Europe, and Asia, and of course the Middle East. And in that regard, you see that major collaborations have happened everywhere. So this revolution we're talking about, as I mentioned earlier, Afrobeats is the first cousin of hip hop. It's a fusion genre that domesticates many of the mannerisms, styles, and attitudes inherited from hip hop. On a deep investigation, these are core elements of connected cultures of the music. I referenced the call and response of hip hop and dancehall, the chanting we hear. All of these things and percussions are all traceable to the continent. What is happening now is that the global Africans and those at home are more connected than ever before through music, food, culture, fashion, history, and memory. These connections are manifesting every day and making the unfamiliar familiar and ensuring that African music has a home in 200 countries. A key element of this revolution, which I would talk about, the privatization and the push to play local music in Nigeria. So if you're in Nigeria today, any Nigerian will tell you it's like 80% Nigerian music. We've become very insular, which is not always such a great thing. We're not really listening to American music as we used to in the 90s and the early 2000s. It's hard to go to a Nigerian event and hear foreign music. You're going to be hearing Nigerian music. And of course, we adapt and adopt everything, including Amapiano, which we love, and I call Niger Piano, right? The broadcast platforms, I think I've talked about that. The global Africans, I've just talked about this. I'm just going to go through this. So, in 2023, it's hard to imagine that any Black people, in fact, anybody on the planet is not familiar or hasn't heard of Afrobeats. And that is a testament to the music, the culture, the community that was viral before social media, but the tools of social media have been critical in bringing us to where we are. So how did this disruption happen? It happened because we refused to give up. We refused to hear no. We didn't know there were any limits. and we believe we were world class. We believe that we deserve to be on the main stage, so we headed for the main stage. We didn't want to be world music. We didn't want to be doing folk music at WOMAD. We wanted to be in the club. I remember in the early 2000s telling people in London that, hey, I've got all these artists who are like sex symbols, and it's like, how can they be sex symbols? They're from Africa. No, you will find out. I don't think anybody has that question today about Burna Boy, Wizkid, Davido, Rema, Tim's, or any of our artists or superstars. Everybody knows not only are they current and constant, they are hot, and we are hot, and young Africa is hot. And this is the key thing. One of the key and critical things is that because of negative infrastructure in telco, Africa went mobile first, right? So while the rest of the world was still on the old fixed lines, we didn't have fixed lines. We had in 1999, Nigeria had 250,000 phone lines. In 2023, we have over 150 million mobile devices in Nigeria. So if you understand that difference in connectivity, and then what happens as we go mobile first and the new social media platforms begin to come alive, the mobile and digital economy is massive. Social media is massive. In social media, in this country, in this world right now today, and in music, you will know that you cannot, that back in the day, you had to be like, to get signed, you could get signed literally not done anything. Today, they're going to check your social media following, they're going to check your heat map, they're going to check your streams as an independent artist before anybody signs you. So with all these things, Nigerians became extremely viral. Nigerian athletes, musicians, Nollywood stars, football players, basketball players, combined have easily over 1 billion followers. This is not something that it should be ignored. That is a humongous amount of influence and power that affects popular culture. You see it with the skit makers, the comedy makers. You see it every single day. And the thing that connects it all is the music, right? So the music is a key driver for everything that we do, because the music connects everything. And you can see I have a slide there that says Nigeria hot. So yes, Nigeria is having a moment, but I don't think it's a moment. I think we're coming into the century. And then that's the key point I wanted to make. So what's the opportunity? The opportunity is around technology-enabled platforms and social media being used by creatives to scale audiences and build businesses in the creator and influencer economy. It's going on right now. In Nigeria, we now have a Ministry of Creative Economy, which is excellent because we have a focused place in government to actually back the sector intentionally, back storytellers, back the music industry, back the live industry, the gaming industry, and then to bring that convergence. This convergence of media, tech, and creativity is actually the core focus of the Omniverse, the new collaboration platform that we are launching, where you're all invited at the end of February 2024 at Landmark in Lagos. We need to build more capacity. We need to get more digital skills and all of that going in our market. You can't really read this, but this is talking about Afrobeats cultural influence on marketing, the pop culture brand evangelizers, and the level of music consumption. I think the image is compressed, but we're just talking about the fact that major brands from the fintech, telcos, and banks have all been partnering with our superstars, doing big deals, pushing big agendas, and making it clear that if you want to reach the demographic, the average age of Nigerians is 19, by the way. So if you want to reach those demographics, then you get an understanding of what should be happening. This digital media spend is the size of our digital advertising in Nigeria. It's still quite small in the global context, but in the African context, it's pretty large. It gives you a good sense of what is happening. But again, like I said, the opportunity is so large because if you look well at Nigeria, you will see that in terms of the streaming platforms and what is going on, Apple may still have under 200,000 subs in a country of 200 million. So the upside is, it's brand new. It's more about how do we get it right and how do we get a price point that works for Africans and a model that works for us. Because 90% of the platforms are global, they're not African driven. Social media has been absolutely critical for us because it enabled us to break the barriers, to use the social media platforms and the tech platforms and and things like TikTok to really change how we are perceived and to get into the conversation, right? This digital advertising spend, which I just showed you before, this is a bit further of a breakdown, and it brings it right all the way down to what even influencers are getting and how they're getting it. And it's good granular information just when you're looking at it from the business perspective. Where's the money being spent? How is it being spent? And these numbers are going to keep going up because, of course, in Nigeria, We have maybe 30 odd million on Facebook. We certainly have a lot more than that on WhatsApp. We have many, many millions on Instagram, on TikTok. These are the platforms where the Nigerians live, and that's what's going on. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing our own festivals coming to this: Afro Nation, One Africa, Afro Summer Jam, and others on the global stage. And it's now clear that this is not a fad, it's not a trend. We're not doing traditional African music. That's fine for WOMAD and all those places and the folk music scene. Our music is contemporary and urban. It is front, center, and mainstream, and that's what we've always wanted. So the US Afrobeats Billboard chart, the UK official Afrobeats chart, and more of these platforms, we can see the genre is growing. The live tours of Burna Boy and Wizkid at major festivals, Burna Boy doing stadiums all over the place, Wizkid doing the stadium in London. I don't know how many other Black artists who are not American, even the American ones, that can sell out stadiums in the UK. And I think that's something that really shouldn't be going unsaid or uncelebrated, because these are major, major moments. 20 years ago, it wasn't even something you could dream about. It wasn't something you could talk about. That teenage kids in the UK would be running around after African superstars was not within the realm of possibility, right? So now monetization, which is the business of the future, how do we get to the business? I'm talking about some of the endorsements you're seeing, about the tours, but these tours are happening internationally. So I'm talking about how do we domesticate this business? Tours, placements, publishing, merchandise. Merchandise is a huge opportunity that the knowledge of the UK music industry can help us with. Because when you have 1 billion followers in social media, the gap that we have is product and merchandise. So if those who are in those elements of the business and that side of the business can partner with us and bring that together with what we're doing, I think that we can see massive monetization for our built brands, for our built talents, for our designers on e-commerce and digital and social media platforms over the next 3 to 5 years, and obviously going forward beyond that. This music consumption is just talking about how people are consuming music, where they're consuming the music on the continent. The guys who are really big, I mean, the most impressive people to me that I really like is Mdondo, who are a platform out of Kenya. Mdondo literally has almost 6 million monthly listeners a month in Nigeria. If you look at this slide I have here, you can see 6.5 million. And that's great to see an African platform having those numbers. Audiomack is free ad supported, 7.6 million in Nigeria, 1.5 million for Spotify in Nigeria. Now you can see the numbers in South Africa. You can see how the South Africa and Nigeria are running neck and neck, how Kenya is doing, how Ghana is doing. But these are still quite small numbers vis-a-vis our major populations, right? Especially in Nigeria. So that's why I said the upside and the opportunity in streaming is enormous, and in digital platforms. Nigerian soft power, which I call our superpower, right? Which is in our DNA. It is the creative expression of our IP, our culture, music, dance, theater. These things is what is actually repositioned Nigeria to the world, and how Nigerians are perceived, and what is connecting us to everybody. And that is something that is now finally being recognized and backed by our government, by our authorities, our politicians, and the man on the street. Because for many, many years, Africans even looked down at these innate talents we were born with as if they were unimportant, as if storytelling was unimportant, not understanding that it is storytelling and narrative that has framed the last 500 years that we reject in terms of perception. So this is really important, and it's important that we come into that situation and realization. Merchandise, fashion, product, and digital. I've already spoken about this, but it's worthwhile reflecting on it, thinking about that opportunity. None of our Nollywood girls are selling hair, makeup, or products or brands of their own. We have so many people who have so much audience, from chefs to creators, from innovators to dancers, from visual artists to curators. And what we need to do is to find the ways to build digital platforms. So that is about bringing the convergence of the tech entrepreneurs on the continent, of the innovators on the continent, with the creators in music, movies, comedy, and dance. Together, I feel that that is how we're going to win in the future going forward. And of course, we have to collaborate with markets where they've already done this, and that being the UK, in Europe, in North America, So where are we today? We're doing about 2.5 billion streams a month on DSPs in 2023. Spotify has put out some great reports that everybody can see. And the room for growth is enormous, the domestic stream still being quite low. We're globalizing fast and everybody's paying attention. And many elements of our cultural DNA and we deliver what I call Afrobeats culture, with movies, blogs, comedy, skits, podcasts, hair and beauty, dance, religious, political, lifestyle, and entertainment content, all being driven by our music. Nigerian musicians are the largest cultural creators and influencers, selling major brands and products to their enormous audiences, followed by the comedians and the actors and the football players. So the cultural and commercial power of the Nigerian musician is at an all-time high. And many Nigerian creators are moving between digital and broadcast media, TV, radio, cinema, and more. The upside opportunity for the Nigerian music economy is huge, as there's still limited revenues from live entertainment, merchandise, product, sync, and publishing. But we can't afford to be complacent or satisfied, as the market still has many weaknesses, and most artists are not monetizing, neither in the management company. We need more management companies, more labels, and more promoters are needed to push the industry forward. While we're being busy globalizing, sometimes it feels like we have not sorted out the foundational work. We should be seeing 60 to 70 million Nigerians using the various DSP, but we are far from those numbers. And it's not just about buying power, which I think is a sort of a soft way to approach it. It's more about rethinking the models that fit for the continent, okay? Publishing, sync, and licensing. There's so much to be done to enhance global collections and to position our music for sync deals globally with film, TV, and ad agencies. And I'm really happy that PPL is here having this conversation. It's all well and good having a hit on YouTube or selling out the O2. It's even better when the next James Bond theme music is Afrobeats. It's even better when we're embedded in culture. We're on BBC One and Channel 2 and Sky. That's what we want to see. That's mainstream, and that's where we deserve to be. So we really need to do the same thing with advertising agencies in the UK as a key, because I believe, and I think the numbers back it up, that music and sports are the two biggest things the advertising industry uses worldwide for the last 25 years. So our music is specific, it fits the DNA, it crosses and it connects. So therefore it's perfect for marketing. And we need to collaborate. Collaboration lies at the heart of all of this. In Africa, within the continent, within Nigeria, and globally, with partners who are ready and willing to be respectful of our talent, respectful of the opportunity, and to build value together so we can all win together. We can't be doing second slavery. We're not going to sit here and have a situation where everything is exported and we don't have a stake in the value chain. We must have a situation where all of us are able to build forward together. Some of the stuff that we need to see happening in the Nigerian market: live performance and touring. We have 700 tertiary institutions that have halls or stadia. We have 36 stadiums of at least 10,000 capacity. We have at least 40, it might be 100 malls with car parks for venues, 10,000 hotels with halls. We have a wedding circuit of easily $150 million for live performance. Bars and lounges, the church. The bukas, for those who don't know, the buka is like street restaurants. So there are various levels for this, but we still have issues to revolve around promoters, around ticketing, policing and security, stage and sound, technical production, merch, secondary sales. So those who are in the business of music, I've just listed for you some key opportunities where you can find local partners on the continent that can help you. There have been the record labels, organizations come together, and MPAN, which is working on publishing, and together they're trying to work. Our collection societies remain opaque. They've been locked in civil wars. I've been part of that journey for 15 years. It's not easy. Nobody has any faith in them, but I believe transparent technology will take them out of the conversation. So for us to truly measure this market, to really see what the true numbers are in Nigeria and how far we have to go to get to real communication. So I have a dog in the background making noise. It's time for Nigeria to fix this issue. So as our economies get stronger, you're going to see bigger buying power, and it will grow the sector naturally because this sector is natural to us. As I talked about Nigeria, in West Africa, we have a domestic market of 200 million Nigerians. Maybe there are 350 million West Africans. So obviously, Nigeria is the driver for the region. It's also the driver for the continent. And we know how to connect everywhere. Once we can deliver safe and secure venues and deliver incredible live experiences and apply tech to experiences and merchandise the opportunity, it becomes massive. So more festivals, more venues, more live experience, digital and physical merch in a continent where the average age is 17 and the aspirations and talent are boundless. I talked about live experience already, technology, sports, esports. Esports is getting massive in Nigeria, and there's also a massive opportunity for the Nigerian music industry because music embedded in esports is already a big thing. And I think that you'll find that in our video gaming going forward, it'll even become bigger than our Nollywood in terms of the storytelling that is possible for us to do within that. and also within the music as well. And music is a connecting thread for all of these spaces. You can't have films, TV, drama, comedy, fashion, art without music. The absence of music is always stark, and music can also stand alone and deliver the live experience, right? Music education, capacity building, and jobs. This, I'm literally almost at the end. I've got 2 slides left. This is key because intuition, while intuition is great, knowledge is even better. So we need to get music and curriculum sorted out from primary school level. We need to get the live band circuit sorted out. I've talked about that. Of course, we can use the power of mobile and online to scale lessons and train many more to work. And one of the key things and places where we're going to take learnings from is what they've done in Korea with K-pop and K-drama. Here, the government authorities have been paying attention. They're working on policy in this area. It's really, really possible because you have to be able. Nigeria is blessed in the sense that we keep being able to discover new talent, which is something that a lot of places struggle with. But in Nigeria, music is like our football. We have endless talent pipelines. The talent comes from the streets, it comes from the schools, it comes from the churches, it comes from families and communities. And it is still self-starting promoters who actually are building the future. It's not the big companies. We see the major labels in Nigeria, but I can't tell you that any of them have done anything specifically wonderful in Nigeria, except being involved in signing and giving global distribution to some of our superstars. So what does the future look like? The future is going to be all around how do we reimagine Africa's narrative? How do we connect the continent? We have an African free trade market, but we really have to think about most of the talent on the continent is trying to get into Nigeria to be able to collaborate and do gigs and tour. We have to improve our tour infrastructure. We have to build a bit like how intra-Africa trade, which they've just come out of in Canex in Cairo, is really about that same thing. How do we drive business amongst ourselves? And with all of that said, the key next steps in building the domestic music market. Rights management and collection has to be resolved. Publishing, sync, and administration needs to be implemented. Music education for professional users, industry, and government. Music education in schools to feed the industry. Facilities and infrastructure for music performance and experience. Development of indigenous digital platforms for music merch, product, and designs. And some of that stuff, we don't have to reinvent it. We can partner with existing platforms, but we do need to have equity. We want to have ownership. We want to see it's African owned so we can support our own as well. I don't think there's anything that says that Africa should not be involved in ownership. I think it's really important. And the biggest market for Nigerian music and African music is global, but the next biggest market is local. So let's own and dominate our music markets and create that and make it available to all Nigerians. We're 220 million. No matter what anybody says, we're always going to have a big voice. Thank you very, very much. I hope I didn't take too long, and I hope you heard everything I said.